Hello fellow cinephiles, 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. So like I did with the last video, I want to continue on doing sort of a bit of a breakdown on particular films that I really enjoyed, and I talk about the movies themselves, go through particular scenes, talk about the overall plot and story, and also get into what I really liked and enjoyed about these particular films. So today I'll be looking at Pleasantville. Now this is a film that I come back to from time to time, every few years, and it's a film I've really loved and enjoyed. Each time I watch it, I draw something else from it. I guess it depends on your age, my age, and the way I think about life and a variety of other things. So it does have an impact on me each time I watched it, and this time it had another sort of impact on me. And I started to see things I didn't see before, and that's what kind of drew me to want to talk about this film in this particular video. The film came out in 1998 and was directed by Gary Ross, and it starred Tobey Maguire, Reese Witherspoon, Joan Allen, William H. Macy, J.T. Walsh, and the late great comic genius that was Don Knotts, and a variety of others. There's also an early Paul Walker in this film as well. And it really follows the story of David and his sister Jennifer. And they're sort of at odds with each other, and then one night during a fight over the TV remote they break it, and mysteriously this man appears, played by Don Knotts, who starts to ask questions about this particular show, Pleasantville, that David really likes, and the reason for the fight is he wanted to watch a marathon and his sister wanted to watch some concert of such, hence the fight. So this TV repairman just appears and he starts asking David questions, and then when he's satisfied with the answers, he gives him a particular special remote. Then he leaves. Mysterious and weird, whatever. They go to press on the TV, they fight again, and all of a sudden they find themselves transported into the Pleasantville TV series that David had been watching and enjoying. And it's like they're swept back up into the 50s, and them being there and their choices made start to alter and affect the people within the show. And it starts to affect the scenery and stuff, and this black and white TV show slowly but surely starts to turn into colour. And it's about the choices made and what happens within this story that affect David and Jennifer, and ultimately craft this unique and interesting story around. Really fascinating film that I don't always see this sort of thing. This film was kind of this mainstream movie in a way, but it had a really unique style to it. The fact that half the film was in black and white was very daring for the time, but people accepted that because of the effect of colour. The use of colour, the use of greyish black and white and colour in this film reminded me of films like Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy first opens the door from her house and we see Oz and what it looks like and how wonderful it is. And this has that same sort of impact. And it was done at a time in the 90s when films were you'd seen a lot of similar films come out. And this was kind of a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways because of its choices and what it did. And, its cast was kind of young. Reese Witherspoon was sort of known, but not really. And Tobey Maguire was another one. And it wasn't really a springboard for both of them, but it was a very interesting film for both of them to be part of. And I really loved their performances. It was made for $60 million, but only went on to make $49.9 million. So it wasn't very successful. And it's a film that has been re-released on DVD, but it's kind of forgotten in a lot of ways. And I find that kind of sad because it's such a unique and interesting concept, and it's just very well done, that I'm surprised not more people enjoyed it. And the fact it didn't do as well could have been the fact that, like I said, half the film was in black and white, and a lot of people don't tend to like that, especially in the 90s. When there was a lot of teen movies and sort of rebellious films going on, that they didn't quite like this being transported back to a time when having a film that's sort of in black and white and transported back to the 50s, a lot of people probably didn't enjoy that concept. Some interesting tidbits about the film. This was J.T. Walsh's last performance. He died of a heart attack, which is really sad. He was one of the great character actors. He was in this, Negotiator, Red Rock West, he's really good in as well, and Last Seduction. There's just so many films that he appeared in these little roles, but he was always brilliant. And it's kind of fascinating this was his last role because there was a kind of a power to his performance here that I really thoroughly enjoyed. This would also mark the final on-screen film appearance by Don Knotts, who would ultimately take cartoon voice work for the rest of his life until his ultimate death. But I thought that was kind of interesting. He played such a really great character, a character that's sort of odd and quirky. We don't really know a lot about. I wanted to know a lot more about him than we actually found out. But Don Knotts just has this way about him that's kind of fun and unique, and he's dressed like, you know, a character he would have played earlier in his career, which I really love. Some other things I found out about. This was the first time that a new feature film created by scanning and digitizing recorded film footage for a purpose of removing or manipulating color. Alright, so that's kind of bits and pieces about it. So I wanted to sort of break down particular scenes, maybe go through the whole film. Ultimately, the film opens up on a commercial talking about a TV channel called TV Time, which was, they talk about him playing these classic TV shows, and one of them is Pleasantville. And it sort of sets up this idea of what is to come, but I kind of like this scene because it's sort of like back in the days when TV was a big thing for people. It still is now, but in a different way. It was sort of popcorn watching. It was just watching old reruns of TV shows and a variety of commercials and bits and pieces. And that was something that was really huge in the 90s. So this sequence actually represented and captured that 90s quite well. It wouldn't have the same effect if it came out now because we don't look at TV the same way. TV to us is more like watching Netflix and streaming services and movies and big budget TV shows. So this was kind of something different, and I really liked that, and it harked back to that sort of time. And it sort of sets up this thing that this show is going to be a marathon in a couple of days. Then we meet David, played by Tobey Maguire, this sort of loner character that you kind of feel for, but he kind of doesn't get involved in life in a lot of ways. He just stands back from it, even though he wishes he could. And when we meet him, we think he's talking to a girl and asking her out, but it's actually not true. She's further away and talking to her boyfriend, and he's just saying these things. And it sort of sets up he's a sort of a loner and a sort of dorky character that finds more joy in watching this Pleasantville show and wishing his life was like that rather than participating in life. And then we meet Jennifer, played by Reese Witherspoon, who's a much more popular character, who's rebellious, who goes against particular things, who it feels like a character that will shake things up, and she ultimately does when they get transported to the Pleasantville world. She sort of starts to play with things and do things that everyone doesn't want it to, especially David, as he doesn't want anything to change. There's a scene that comes after that where David's sitting down, he's watching the TV, Pleasantville episodes on, and you know, William H. Macy, Joan Allen, and a couple of kids on there appear on the screen, and he's watching it. In the background, his mum's having an argument with their father. They're obviously divorced. This is something we learn through the film, or separated anyway. And they're having this fight about taking the kids, and she's going away and all this sort of stuff. And you can tell it's a difficult conversation she's having on the phone. But David doesn't want anything to do with it, so he sees it, and then he sort of turns the TV up. And he looks at the TV, and he sees this family, and he really imagines and wishes he was part of this family, which is a precursor to what happens later. But it kind of shows that David's kind of a character that stands back and takes things in, and he doesn't get involved in a lot, and there's only certain things he really enjoys and loves, and he only really has one friend at school. But due to what transpires through the film, he ultimately changes and becomes better, and I kind of like what they do with that. And like I mentioned, because there's a concert coming on she wants to watch, and invited the hot guy over to watch it, and David wants to watch this marathon, and ultimately they clash and fight and break the remote. And there's no way to turn the TV on, and they start yelling at each other, and that's when they hear a knock at the door, and here's this TV repairman played by Don Knotts, who's great in his little role, in his final little role. And he just appears like he's been listening to him, like he knows what's happening, like there's a magic to him, like, I don't know, like not a genie necessarily, but he has that sort of element to him. I wish we learned more about him, but he's kind of interesting to see on screen anyway. A lot of people might know who Don Knotts is. He did a lot of the Herbie movies. He's been around for a long, long time, and he's a really great, unique and quirky comedian that did a variety of things, but this was sort of towards the end of his career, and I kind of like what he did in this film. And he starts to ask David questions about Pleasantville that David knows everything about, and when he's happy about that, and it's like he's found someone who finally gets it, someone he can reward by allowing them to go into this TV show and experience it for themselves. And he feels David's that person. And he gives him this special remote, this old silver classic remote that you would see probably in the 50s or 60s. And of course, Jennifer wants to watch this show, and they fight again, and ultimately they press the button, they're transported into the TV show. So here they are, they're standing in this living room, they don't know why they're there, they realise they're in black and white, more grey, I guess, sepia sort of colour, and don't know what's going on. And then David realises they're in the TV show, and all Jennifer wants to do is get out. And then we're introduced to the William H. Macy, Joan Allen characters, where we see them, and they've cooked this huge dinner like you do in the 50s, and it's all part of this. They get swept up in this thing, and they don't really know what to do. And Jennifer desperately wants to go home. It keeps going on about, you know, the guy coming over and all these sort of things, but it's not going to happen. And they're told by the TV repairman through the TV what's actually transpired, and he leaves them there with no way back. He doesn't admit it, but David's kind of likes the fact he's in this show because it's something he really loves. Jennifer doesn't sort of accept things until she meets Paul Walker's character, Chip, who pulls up in the car, and she becomes interested then because, oh, who's that? And then they go to high school, and we meet her friends, and you just know that Jennifer is going to cause trouble eventually in the film, and she does, but it's sort of that good setup. Then we see David playing basketball, and that he can't miss. The whole basketball team just can shoot, and they never miss a basket. And he proves that it can go at any time because he kicks the ball and hits the wall and such. It isn't until Chip comes up to David and wants to date Jennifer, and when David, who's known as Bud in the show, says no, it sort of throws everything out, and they miss all the baskets, and Chip misses the basket, and they just watch it roll past. Don't touch it, it's bad luck type thing. And you can see just by them being there and choices they're making within the show, it starts to affect the characters and the world itself. And I thought this was a very interesting way to sort of go about it. And we start to see Jennifer. We can see Jennifer starting to affect things. She's in classes, and they say, you know, this street leads to this street. And then she's like, well, what's outside of Pleasantville? And they don't know what to make of it. So already she's planted this seed of changing things without meaning to. Or maybe she means to. She just is just unhappy being there. She likes to mess with things, and it's kind of an interesting setup. There's this sort of Stepford Wives type thing about the whole movie too, in a way. The wives are at home cooking and cleaning and doing all that stuff and doing the housework, and the husbands are off at work. The husbands expect dinner every night when they come home from work, and it's sort of littered through it, but it's clever what they do with it ultimately. And like I keep mentioning, they start affecting it. And then we see that Bud goes to the job at the diner, and that's where we meet Jeff Daniels' character, Bill, who runs the diner. And him being there, obviously the show's going, and Bill's this kind of character that obviously is written that way, that certain things have to be done a certain way, otherwise he doesn't know what to do. So when Bud comes late, he's been cleaning the counter and he can't stop, and it's starting to wear away. This is where Bud says to him, Bud is David, says to him, you don't have to do all these things in order. You can do them out of order. And this sort of surprises Bill, but sort of excites him, the fact he's able to do something different. And this is where sort of a little bond formed between these two characters, and the fact that David's doing this thing is altering the show once again. Jennifer finally decides to go on a date with Chip. They end up at the diner, and she just starts playing games a little bit. She goes to the bathroom to freshen up. There's no toilets in there because it's like these things don't exist because we don't see them. So there's many things throughout the film like that. Like the books are empty, and certain things that don't do certain things or show certain things ultimately do later in the film. And also Bud starts to help Bill. It's like things are awakening in him, and I kind of like that as well. Jennifer takes Chip to Lover's Lane where they ultimately have sex, and this starts to change things. The character changes. Colours slowly start to appear, this red flower and a variety of other things. So it's kind of this really interesting effect that's having, and that starts a ripple effect throughout the thing. So no one cares about basketball. They're losing, the team's losing, which they've never done. And this is just a huge impact on the characters. And as David said, you can't do this because these people don't exist. You can't do these things to these people that don't exist. And it's like whenever the characters experience something, certain intense emotions or things they haven't experienced, is when they start to be affected by colour and it starts to shape them. It's a very interesting way to go about it. And David and Jennifer don't get affected by this till much later in the film, because there's certain things that they haven't done, and that sort of brings them to life and brings colour into their lives, so to speak. After they finish for the night, Bill comes to visit Bud and tell him that he's excited because Bud wasn't there, that he did things in a different way, and it sort of awakens this sort of uniqueness to the character. And then that's when he sees Joan Allen's character, and there's a spark between them straight away. Straight away, this is altered things again. And this is something, this relationship will grow as the film goes on, and they'll start to have impact on each other in different ways. And it's kind of this artistic heart and soul of the film in a lot of ways to me, in my opinion. Like I mentioned, this has some great casting besides Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, Joan Allen, Jeff Daniels, William H. Macy, J.T. Walsh in his final performance. There's so many great performances in this movie, and they're all really great, and they suit the roles so well. As I mentioned, there are things that I saw in this viewing of this film this time that I didn't see before. And it's like David and Jennifer represent the male and female aspects of the show. You've got David, who wants everything to stay the same. He wants their lives to be the same and run the same way, because that's just how he's always seen it and always expects it to happen. Where Jennifer's not like that. Jennifer rebels against that, and it's sort of that female aspect where she doesn't want to feel repressed. She doesn't want to be forced to do things she doesn't want to do. And this ultimately starts to affect Joan Allen's character as well, in that she starts to realize that being a housewife isn't the be all or end all of everything. And she starts to represent that breaking free that the female characters will become part of because of that. And I've never noticed that before. I guess getting older and changing my views and thinking about things, that's where I started to see these aspects I hadn't seen in the previous viewings of this movie, which I thought was really, really cool. In a scene after that, we learn Jeff Daniels' character, Bill, is a budding artist. He ultimately does a mural in the window of the diner every year, but he only does it once a year. And as he's starting to awaken because of Bud changing things and allowing him to make his own decisions, he starts to want to be involved in doing more murals or more paintings, rather than once a year all the time. And he shows Bud this paintings he did, and Bud's impressed by it. There's something that Bud does. So ultimately the books start to get words in them, and picture books get images in them, and colour slowly starts to come into things because of what people are doing. That Bud gives Bill this book, or shows him this book of world art, and he starts flicking through it, and he's drawn in extraordinary pictures that it really inspires Bill to craft something interesting and unique and try his hand at doing something extraordinary. And as I learned in the audio commentary, there's one particular picture where it's Adam and Eve getting kicked out of Garden of Eden. And that sort of sets up a lot of what's happening in the film. In particular, these characters appear and people start to get kicked out of this beautiful, wonderful, amazing garden that is Pleasantville. And they start to be affected by what's happening and expelled because of certain things. So that sort of sets that up, and it's an interesting imagery to sum up certain things that happen in the movie. But it just really inspires him, and this is probably one of my favourite scenes, because Bud just does it because he knows Bill likes his stuff. He doesn't think about, maybe we shouldn't start to change things in the show. He's just swept up in it all, and he wants Bill to be able to express himself in a creative way. And he allows him to do that through showing him these beautiful paintings and images within this giant art book. And this is about the time in the film where we're introduced to J.T. Walsh. His character, he plays the mayor of the town. And like the old school mayors, he doesn't want anything to change. He's had the town the same way for so long, it shouldn't change. But when the basketball team starts to lose games and people start to change it to colour and things start to change in a way he doesn't like, that's when he takes a stand and ultimately creates these rules and trying to control people who are turning into colour and allowing the people who are still black and white to live the life he thinks they should have always lived. There are so many moments in this film where I look at J.T. Walsh's character, and all I can think of is Donald Trump. He has the same way about him, the same old school, trying to create this old school idea of what life should have been like on taking America back. And that's kind of what happens in this movie, especially J.T. Walsh and the characters are still in black and white, who are all the parents, who are all the older characters within the story and haven't had that experience and don't want that experience, are the ones that start to band together and listen to his rhetoric and think he's the answer to their problems. And he's ultimately not, but I just thought that was really interesting. This is a little scene that I kind of like. So colours starting to appear. This chick has bubble gum and blowing bubbles and it's pink. And then her mother ends up taking her to the doctor and her whole mouth's turning colourful, and the doctor, all he can say, who has this big thing on his head as usual from that time period, all he can say is, just cut down on the sugar and the sweets and you should be fine. Then the mother plays cards with Joan Allen's character, a couple other wives and a couple other female characters. And this is where Joan Allen's character sees colour in the cards and she's shocked by it. She's not quite sure what to make of it. But she quickly hides it because she's scared to think what the women may think of her in seeing these things and doesn't want to allow them to know that she's starting to see things differently. This leads into a scene with Joan Allen's character, Betty, is talking to Jennifer and asking her what happens at Lover's Lane, because she's starting to hear all these stories and she's starting to see the colours starting to happen. And she starts to explain to her what happens there, that they have sex. This is where Betty looks at her and says, "What's that?" Because it's a show set in the 50s, we never see any of these things and it's written that way. Of course the characters wouldn't know what certain things are, especially sex. And so she starts to explain it to her, and Betty's taken back by it. She's like, what is this thing? I've never experienced that. Her husband has never done those sort of things. And then subtly, Jennifer says to her, you don't have to do it with someone else, you can do it by yourself. And this leads into a scene where Betty ultimately pleasures herself in the bath and she doesn't know what it is, and then she starts to experience things, and then suddenly she turns into colour. And her husband doesn't know what's going on. He's like, she doesn't usually take a bath now, why is she in bed? And then suddenly the tree out the front catches the light. And it's such an intense moment that it causes her to change into colour. And I just think this is such a fascinating scene in that she experiences something she hasn't experienced, and this is when she starts to come to life. What I realised watching the movie itself is colour is the representation of change. When colour appears, it's people changing or experiencing something they haven't experienced before. And it's a way of showing how that's had an impact on the particular characters themselves. And I think that's a really great, interesting kind of representation and metaphor in the use of colour from black and white. Black and white is the old ways which we see with the older characters who don't turn into colour. And colour is the younger generation, so it's kind of like the old and the new, and how we see that as a contrast. And then because the tree's on fire and the firefighters only save cats out of trees, they've never had a fire in their whole existence in that particular town, Bud runs to them and says, this tree's on fire, we need to put it out. And he's yelling, fire, fire, and they don't understand. Then he yells, cat, and then they all jump into action. And then he has to teach him how to put the fire out, how to use the hose, all that sort of stuff. This action ultimately puts Bud in the limelight in a lot of ways. The younger kids, the teens start to look at him for answers because he seems to know things and be able to do things they've never experienced or seen before. And this is the beginning of it. He wins an award putting the fire out and helping the firemen. And this leads into a really interesting scene, probably another one of my favourite scenes in the film, where he's gone to work. And all the teens are there. Some are in colour, some are still in black and white. And as he steps through the door, everybody's watching him. He's not sure what to make of it. And Jennifer comes to him and goes, they have questions for you. And he's like, questions? And he's become this popular character, this real popular person in town that everybody wants to ask these questions to. And the first question they ask is, how did you know how to put the fire out? And then he starts going into this thing about, from where I'm from, that's just what they do. And they said, where's that? And he said, outside Pleasantville. And everybody's shocked. They're like, what do you mean outside Pleasantville? Is something out there? And that intrigues them even more. He's long forgotten about the fact he didn't want to order anything. He's just swept up in it all now, that he just goes with it. And that's the impact of how people can stay strong in something, but can slowly be altered by the situations or experiences that they're having within that particular world. They start to ask him about questions about the books, and that the books don't have any, words in them. And as he starts to tell the stories of these books, words starts to appear, and he starts to do that. And I really like this scene because it's like bringing so much to them, opening their minds, awakening the characters, allowing them to experience and read and get involved in different worlds, different from their own. But this starts to have a negative effect on the older generation, the parents and such in the town, because they're like getting upset that these people are changing colour, that they're all going to the library. It's like all of this change is happening too quick and they don't understand it, and they rebel against it because they don't understand it. I just think it's kind of interesting aspect to that particular scene, and ultimately the world that's unfolding before them, and how it's altering and how they're opening people's minds by just being themselves and being there. Both David and Jennifer go through big changes in the film. David's change is a bit not as large in certain aspects. He becomes confident in himself. He starts to know what he can do and can't do, and becomes really confident. And that starts to make him embrace life a lot more, becoming a participant rather than an observer. And that's how he sort of alters and learns to stand strong and becomes a leaderish type because of what's happening to him and then his sister, and what's happening to the characters in Pleasantville. Jennifer's the one who goes through the most change. She starts off as this rebellious teen, and, having sex and changing things and altering things. But they start to get better, and she starts to worry, why haven't I turned in colour? Why haven't I become colour like everybody else when I've done tons of these things that everyone else has done? And it's that thing where it's like, she's got to find that thing that she hasn't done. And that comes to studying and reading and accepting certain things. And that's when it starts to alter for her. And she goes from this rebellious teen girl who wants nothing to do with education or teachers, and is just swept up in normal teen things like boyfriends and going to the mall and bits and pieces like that. Where when she's here, she starts to be affected by it, and it changes her, and she turns into this sort of bookworm in a way, but turns into this person who's inquisitive and wants to learn more, who wants to grow, and only goes to college in the end because she feels she can't go to college in the real world. So there's a great sort of arc for her that I really love as well. And it also brings attention from Marley Shelton's character towards Bud, who her character is really meant to be in a relationship with another character in the film, but because of his actions, she starts to take notice of him. And at first he's a bit hesitant, but then he sort of accepts it, and he's able to ask her out, and they go on this date. But Marley Shelton's character is really cool and interesting, and I like the impact that she has on Bud. And he starts to be excited about these things, you know what I mean? And starts to embrace aspects of himself he hadn't been able to do in the real world and in real life. And it's just kind of really cool to see. Because of all that's happening, J.T. Walsh's character ultimately is trying to control things, and he's trying to bring in Bud's dad to be part of it, to stop what's happening, and allow him to become part of this ultimate men's group that he hadn't asked before. And he accepts, and then he's yelling out to Betty to bring in some food, and she doesn't. And this is where Bud goes in to see what's wrong. This is probably, I know I've mentioned a couple of scenes, this is ultimately my absolute favourite moment in this film. He goes into the kitchen where his mum has got her back to him. There's so much going on in this scene, and I listened to the commentary of Gary Ross talking about the way he wrote the scene. There's a lot of levels and a lot going on, and it's just the way it's captured is really wonderful. And when Betty turns around, she's face is in colour and she's crying, and it's a really powerful choice for Joan Allen to choose to do in this particular scene, which gave it a lot of weight and gave it a lot of power and a lot of sadness. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't want people to see that she's in colour. She starts to become scared and worried. And this is where Bud does something that he wasn't able to do for his mother in real life, is he sits down and starts to talk to her, and he ultimately starts applying makeup to her face to hide it. So this grey makeup he starts to put on her so to hide the colour. And he starts to realise, like helping her, he starts to realise, I wish I could help my mother in the real world. And he realises he hasn't been as good son as he should have or could have really been. And it takes this particular moment with a fictional mother that he realises these things. And I found out the way they kind of did this scene, which I thought was fascinating, is they just applied green makeup to Betty's face, to Joan Allen's face. So it ultimately comes up, and then they change the colour within the computer and change it to black and white, or a more grey colour really. But it's that kind of concept with the green screen, how they're able to alter it, and that's how they did the makeup. And I thought that was really fascinating. It's quite a powerful moment to see this character in colour and then slowly change back into the other, into a black and white sepia colour. I think that scene's just absolutely wonderful on so many levels. And like I mentioned, Bud asks Marley Shelton's character out, Margaret, and that was something he couldn't do, and it's an anchoring point back to the start of the film where he's trying to ask that girl out, and this time he's able to do it. And this is where the Don Knotts character, TV repairman, once again appears on the TV and says, look, just use the remote, I can bring you home. And he's like, because of what he's been part of, and he's completely forgotten about the real world in certain aspects. And because he's been able to ask a girl out and she said yes, he doesn't want to go back. And they get into this argument, and only Bud turns the TV off. He goes upstairs to talk to Jennifer, and he's hiding in the shadows of choices. So the shadows represent the choice he's made. He's watching her read a book. And as soon as he steps through the door, he's already made the decision he's not going back, and he's not going to tell her that the TV repairman appeared and said that he could bring them home. He just goes along with it because he can see, because of it, he wants this experience, and also because of the fact that Jennifer's starting to alter and change as well and starting to have her own experiences. Part of him, I think, doesn't want to take that away from her. So it's kind of like he doesn't tell her, and now they're part of this world. And they don't even miss the previous world now because they're just swept up in what's going on. And as they're driving up, Etta James's At Last song comes on. This was the movie that really made me take notice of this song, which I've always really loved since. The driving up, it's black and white, and all of a sudden there's sort of flower petals falling out of the trees, and they're pink. And then when they get to the park area, it's just all in colour. There are still some teens in black and white, but everything is in colour. And it's this huge experience for us as an audience member, but also for Bud finally seeing all of this colour. And things become a bit more focused for Bud, and he starts to question why he hasn't also turned into colour. And in this same sequence, Betty, because of her experience with Bill, goes to see him, and when she arrives, what is it? So Betty's in town, and she sees this mural that Bill has painted in the window, and she goes into the diner. And this is another wonderful scene. There's so many great scenes throughout the movie, but this scene's wonderful because it's like he's painting and he's trying to be trying to do these great things, and she starts to see things a bit differently because of the fact she was a bit in colour, and she's starting to realise she's not happy in the life that she's been forced to live, and is starting to starting to be woken up. But it's this scene that she sees the colour. He shows her a picture of a painting by Picasso, and she looks at it and she says, she's crying. He goes, no, and he's like, no, she's not. He's like, she's crying. And then we do kind of start to see a tear, and then we pan up and see that tears are rolling out of Betty's face. And because of that, the makeup's starting to run. And she turns quickly, scared what Bill might think. And he accepts her. And he ultimately takes all the makeup off. And he accepts her for who she is. Not his interpretation of things, or how he thinks she should live, or the old school restraining characteristics of the Pleasantville. He just sees her as she really truly is. And it's such a beautiful and powerful scene. And this is what starts to alter both their lives within Pleasantville and the extended Pleasantville family that she's part of. And this is where a strong bond is formed between Bill and Betty. And because Betty's starting to change, we lead into the next scene where William H. Macy's character, George, comes into the house. Still all black and white, of course. And all the lights are off. He puts his coat down and he calls out to Betty and no one appears. And to the kids, and there's no one there. And he doesn't understand why. It's how it's always been. They've always been here when I come home. And then he starts to put the coat back again and starts to go through what's trying to transpire, and it doesn't. He goes into the kitchen, his dinner's not ready, there's nothing to eat for him, he doesn't know what's happening. A thunderstorm is happening outside. Pleasantville has never had any rain, so this is the impact of the changes is starting to affect the weather, and he doesn't know what to do. And we see the rain coming down, and then we see Bud and Margaret at the park, and it's nighttime, it's starting to rain, and everybody's panicking because they don't know what it is. Bud has to explain to them that it's just rain, it can't hurt you, because they haven't experienced it before, and some of them start to change into colour. It's kind of this really cool sequence, because so much is happening and so much is altering very quickly. And also when Margaret and Bud are at the park, he sees this apple and she picks it for him and makes him eat it. And it comes back to the Adam and Eve thing of eating this apple and their representation of that and the effect what happens to them because they're in some sort of garden as well. And how it leads back to that particular painting we saw at the start earlier in the film. It's a great representation of that, and I kind of love that. And while it's raining, George doesn't know what to do, and he goes down to the local bowling alley where J.T. Walsh and all the men are. And he starts, and then George appears, and J.T. Walsh's character doesn't know really what to make of it, and they start to talk about, and this is where he gives his sort of Donald Trump-esque speech in front of this giant scoreboard and starts to lay down things and saying we need to take back things the way they were, this change isn't good, and men don't know what to do when their wives aren't there to cook for them. And one of the guys shows that his shirt has been burned with an iron because she was distracted, and they're just like, we've got to take all this back. And this is where it starts to alter things, and they try to take charge with rules for people who are coloured but also part of that town. Those who have changed into colour, and also the people who stay the same. This is where it sort of starts to shift between different types of people, and it starts to look at the segregation and things that happened within the 50s, and that's represented by people turning into colour and being banned from certain places by people who are black and white. And it sort of creates this divide between them. The rules represent you can't listen to any other music except for this, you can't use particular colours, you can't do all these sort of things, and it starts to affect the people who have turned into colour. And it's a really sort of sad aspect to the film because they're trying to take control back and they can't. And it starts to have this terrible impact. While all this is going on, the black and white people start to attack people who've turned into colour. And this is where Bud, who's still black and white, ultimately starts to see the negative effects of certain things. He's standing with Margaret, and after a day, it's a night time, he gives her this umbrella because it's raining, it's colourful. And this is where a couple of teen guys show up and give them shit about dating because they're from different types of people. And it leads into that discrimination aspect between the two. And it leads into this moment where Bud finally turns into colour. Betty's being accosted by these teen boys, and he just shows up and knocks one of them down. And because he did something he hadn't done before, because he'd been able to protect his fictional mother and not his mother in real world, it has an effect on him and he turns into colour. And this is the moment where he stands his ground and he evolves and turns into a very strong and confident character, which I really love. And there's a bond that forms even closer between him, Bud, and Betty. Bill ultimately paints a mural on the diner window, and this is where all hell breaks loose. The black and white sort of people who are still in black and white start to smash it in, and this all hell breaks loose in this particular sequence. And this leads to the people who have turned into colour to be in hiding, and they're reading the rules, and one of them puts the jukebox on and the others fear it because what if they hear it? And then they just put it on. They have this great moment where they just accept that things have changed, but they can still be who they are in this particular moment with each other, which I really thought was fantastic. It says a lot about the characters and what transpires. And because Bill's had enough and Bud's have enough, they ultimately decide to paint a mural on the brick wall. And the mural is a representation of everything that's changed, or everything that they've experienced, and also putting down particular rules and breaking them within what we see. And they ultimately are arrested. It's a defining moment for the characters and defining moment for the film in a lot of ways. You know, Bud and Bill accept the consequences of their actions. It leads to a court case where they're ultimately being pushed around and J.T. Walsh's character is taking control. And this is the moment where Bud really takes a stand. After everything has transpired, he starts to explain things about people turning into colour. He says stuff to his father who changes, and everybody else starts to change except for J.T. Walsh. He won't accept it. So Bud realises by pushing his buttons, making him angry, it'll do it, and it changes and he runs off really scared. So it's like, ultimately, they can't control change, and change is going to happen no matter what, and it's represented from people turning from black and white into colour. That kind of old school moral aspect to the film, like that kind of feels a little bit To Kill a Mockingbird-ish, just to the era and where it's set and how they have to defend themselves. It's very different story-wise, but it just kind of feels like that, a guy taking a stand for what's right no matter what happens. And because of this, the whole town's in colour now. Everything's changed into colour. They see colour TV for the first time. And it's just, them being there has altered it so much that it doesn't look like the place it was when they first arrived. They free the town. Don't allow the rules and regulations and stuff that's always been the same to restrict it. They're able to break free. And now they can do anything, and they can leave Pleasantville. There's actually other towns and other things outside of that now since they've mentioned it. This is where Bud makes the difficult decision to go back home. And Jennifer doesn't want to. Jennifer wants to go on to college. She wants to experience the world a bit more. And so she does. And he returns home. And it's like this extraordinary experience he had. They could have just left it there, and he's standing in front of the TV. He's returned back to the normal world, back into the 90s. And he's just standing there. Then he hears his mother crying. And he goes to her and she starts to talk about particular things and how she was meant to go on this date and she felt bad because he was younger than her and trying to make sense of her life. She's crying and mascara's running. And he just sits there and he does something that he did with Joan Allen's character. He starts to wipe away the running mascara and the tears like he was applying the makeup to Betty's character. And he starts to say, life is messy. Life is something you can't control and it's going to change anyway. Kind of what he did within Pleasantville. And that's his arc in showing that he's come so far from the character we met at the beginning. And Jennifer has as well, as she wants to learn more and be better a person than she had been previous. It's a really wonderful sort of moment, and we end on Don Knotts sitting in the car smiling, like happy that everything's gone back to kind of the way it was, and he's not angry anymore that they changed things. He's just happy they've been able to have this particular experience. It makes you wonder about his character too. He's been looking for someone for so long to do this to, and he's done it. Is that it for him, or is he going to continue on to find more and more people for them to get sucked into other TV shows? There's so much more they could have done with Don Knotts' character. And that's one, not gripe, but one thing I would have liked more of is his character and how he has this ability. Is he a wizard? Where does he come from? There's all these sort of questions I have in regards to his character. The movie overall is such a beautiful and wonderful film that always draws me in. I always like stories where characters have an arc, a small arc no matter what, and they take a stand against something that's wrong and be a stronger character and evolve into someone who does take a stand. And that's exactly what this film does. The use of black and white and colour is extraordinary, and it was something that was one of the first films to sort of do these sort of things, but it's something that people use all the time now. So it's groundbreaking in that regard. The story might have been simple and something we'd seen before, but it was dealing with history, it was dealing with TV shows and male and female's roles within those sort of lives and worlds and eras. And it really started to make us as audience question things like the characters themselves were questioning things in the film. I think Gary Ross did a fantastic job with this film. It is an extraordinary movie. I'm glad that it's been re-released in certain aspects, and I really highly recommend this film if you haven't seen it. It is such a great movie that represents so much and is executed in such an extraordinary way with extraordinary characters. And just this feeling, you leave the movie with this feeling of, like the characters in the movie, an awakening in a way. You can look at it and think of your own sort of day-to-day life, and sometimes it might be boring, sometimes it might be controlled, and living in this controlled environment. And just watching this film and awakening to the idea that you don't have to do what everyone else is telling you. You don't have to be anybody else but yourself. And in accepting who you are, you can ultimately help others and affect others. One of my favourite films in the 90s, just because it's willing to do something a little different and express ideas and talk about particular issues facing people at the time and in decades earlier, and addressing them in a way that's not taking anything away from it or making fun of it or being derogatory towards it. It's just addressing it in a creative and interesting way. One scene I forgot to mention, there is a scene towards the end where Betty is sitting on the chair with George in the park. Everything's changed. Betty's changed. She doesn't want to live the life she was living. She still cares about she still cares about George, and even teaches him how to cook earlier in the film when she doesn't want to, and he starts to respect that. And she's like, where do we go from here? And George is like, I don't know. And then as it pans back from Betty, we see Bill, and he goes, I don't know either. It's kind of like she's finally found someone who sees her as a person and wants to be part of her life, and this strong bond and romance between these two. But she still loves and cares for her husband, George. And it's like, they really don't know what's going to happen next. So like I said, filled with many great scenes. All the performances are great. And it's just a really wonderfully put together film that says a lot and sort of starts to... It's a film that makes you start to think and start to realize certain aspects of your life that you wish you could change and become stronger in, or not be controlled by. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you did enjoy this video. Let me know in the comments below if you have seen this and what you thought of it. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.